Hello everybody, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use Django. So let's get started. So first of all, what you want to do is install Django. So we can go to our terminal and type in pip install Django. So I've already got it installed, so I can continue. Next, we're going to start our project. So the way we can do that is Python -m Django start project, and let's call mine Django tutorial. And I'm going to do it within the current directory, which is what this dot is. If you want to create a new directory, you don't need this dot. So you can see this created it within the current directory and manage.py file and a Django tutorial subfolder. So manage.py is essentially a wrapper around this Python -m Django or Django admin. And essentially it contains commands like run server and make migrations for database and things like that. This Django tutorial subfolder is essentially the main configuration for your application. It contains your base URLs, your settings, and some deployment options here. So essentially, Django projects consist of apps, and apps are like logical groupings of functionality. For example, by default, Django has apps for admin, sessions, authentication, and so on. So each different app should have a single responsibility and should be doing one thing. So what we're going to do first is start by creating an app. So we can do Python -m Django start app, and I'm going to call mine my app. And you can see this created a folder called my app, and it has a migrations directory. And this is essentially where your database creation commands and your altering of tables will go automatically by Django when you run migrations. You have an admin.py file, which is essentially where you describe what the admin dashboard can see and how it can alter your models and create rows in the database and things like this. So this is where you register the interaction with the admin dashboard and your models here. Apps.py is essentially your application configuration for this app. Models.py is where you define your database models, so your tables, what specific columns are on those tables and things like that, and you define them in an object relational mapping manner, so an object-oriented manner, and Django automatically translates that to SQL for you. We have a test.py file, which is where you define your test cases for your views, and finally we have our views.py file, which is essentially API endpoints that you can map URLs to in your application. So one thing we're missing here is a urls.py file. So we can create that urls.py file here, and inside here we can define our URL patterns. And essentially a URL pattern, so from django.urls import path, so essentially a URL pattern maps a specific path, so something within your URL, to a view, or maybe it maps it to further URLs and things like that. So what we're going to do here is define a path and call it an empty path to be like your index.html. And we're going to basically say in our views index, we're going to take a request and we're going to return a HTTP response. And we're just going to say hello world. Inside here, from Django HTTP import HTTP response. So now we've created our first view index, which takes a request object, does nothing with it, but it instantly returns a text response, hello world. So now inside here, we can import from .views, import index, and here we can now map this to our index view. And now within our main Django tutorial app, so remember this is our core application where we define settings and things like that. Within our URLs here, we can basically map. We can pretty much map anything that starts with my app. Please map it to my app.urls. So please map anything that starts with my app to this URLs file for further consideration. So this path slash, because we're actually mapping my app to here first, and then this is now an empty URL, this will map my app slash to this index view. Similarly, if we did path hello index, this will map my app slash hello to the index view. So let's now run our server by going Python manage.py run server. If we go to our browser, we can see that we have our application set up, and we can now do /myapp/. And as we saw before, this first goes to the root application URLs, goes to myapp, and this just includes this second file, myapp.urls. So this takes anything starting with myapp and just basically says, anything that starts with myapp, go to this URLs file and further evaluate it. So it goes myapp, then it says, after that, we're now in here. What's the path after myapp? Or it's just /, which is just this index one. And we can do /hello as well. And this takes us to this one. If we change this to test, we can see that's not mapped to anything. So now let's explain models. So essentially what models are, as I said before, are essentially database models, and they map to SQL tables. So I can create, for example, a to-do item, models.model. This is what it inherits from this class, this models.model class provided by Django. And now we can start using specific sort of data types provided by Django. So if I go to here and I call it sort of description, or let's call it content, and we just take a text field. So I'm actually going to say, can we use a char field, and a max length is 100. So this maps down to a varchar 100. And I'm also going to have a completed Boolean, and that maps to a Boolean field. And it's also good practice to provide a string method to preview it nicely, for example, in the admin dashboard or when you're printing things in the console. So you can actually just return the content. Otherwise, then it would display something horrible, like it would display something like to-do item, something like this without any content. But here, this actually would display the content in the console. So now what I can do is register these models inside my settings.py file. So inside here, you have to declare what apps you have installed. And so since we created this my app, I'm going to say we now have my app installed. And this will allow us to do Python manage.py make migrations. And you can see it's created a model to do items. And now if we do python.manage.py migrate, that would migrate it. So if we look in our database, currently got nothing in here, 0 tables. So we've made the migrations, which basically gets Django prepared for what to run on our database. It defines like our create table commands and things like that. And migrate actually runs these commands against our SQLite file. So you can see now it's migrated. And if we go to our file, we can see it's all in here. So we can essentially see my app, remember, had a model called to do item. So if we look in our database, we can see my app underscore to do item. And this now has an ID, a content, and completed column. So now this has been applied in SQLite. So again, I can now use these models inside my views. So let's start by creating a basic view that just lists all of the rows within a table in our database. So i.e. all of the objects inside the model. So let's do that. So if I call this def get to-dos, and we take a request, remember every view takes a request, and we can basically say to-dos is from.models import to-do item, and we can do to-do item dot objects dot all, and this will get all objects from the database. And so this is essentially equivalent to a select all from my app underscore to do item. It's just more of like in a programmatic fashion. So dot objects dot all, rather than writing SQL queries manually. And this is the ORM, or object relational mapping aspect of Django. So now what I can do is say to do list, and for to do in to dos, I can pretty much add the content to the to-dos, and I can just return a HTTP response to-do list. And so if we look, if I now create a URL to actually map to this view, because otherwise then it's just sort of a ghost view that nobody can access. The function's there, but we haven't mapped it to anything. So let's map this to to-dos. and let's say to-dos. Obviously, we need to get to-dos, and this was also the name of this. It was get to-dos. And actually, because we're inside my app, we have to do my app / to-dos. And make sure that you add a slash after these as well. So now we're in my app / to-dos. What we can do is list all of our to-dos. So if we go to our admin dashboard /admin, we do not have an account yet. So let's start by creating an account. So what I'm going to do is Python manage.py create super user. And I'm going to use my username, this password. And now let's log in. And you can see that I have logged in. So let's start by mapping to-dos on the admin dashboard so I can manually add some rows into the database. So the way I can do that is if I go to this admin file here, I can now do from our models, import to-do item, admin.site.register to-do item. So this basically will register to-do item to our admin site. And you can see now that I can access my app to-do items. So I can see all of the to-do items inside the database, and I can also add them now. So if I now add it and basically say this is a test to do and save it, you can see that I've added this to the database. So now if I go back here to my /my app /to-dos endpoint, I can now see that I've added test to do. Finally, I'm going to be explaining how templates work. So let's get started with that. So pretty much I'm going to create a new templates file. And inside here, I'm going to create a my app /todos.html, right? And what I am going to do inside here is say context. So it's always good to create a context dictionary. So if I do context equals to-dos, and essentially now I can just return render request todos.html context. So I think that should be fine. I think it should automatically find this path. If it doesn't, that's fine, no worries. So template does not exist. So I think I need to specify my app. Yeah, so now that I've specified my app, so let's actually remove this my app directory here, and then that way I can just specify todos.html. So now you can see I'm basically rendering a template, this todos.html file, and I'm passing in the context. So if I now provide to-dos in here, you can now see that it's pretty much listing the Python variable in here. It's providing a query set, to-do items, test to do. And you can see this is where the string method comes in handy. So if I comment this out and refresh, you can see now this just says to-do item object 1, which isn't very useful to me. So this string function is very useful here. So now essentially what I can do is for to-do in to-dos, and I can say end for. I can now essentially just put in the to-do in here, and you can see that prints it. I can then put this in normal HTML. So for example, Copilot is giving me this stuff. So to-do.title, we actually called it to-do.content, and we said to-do.completed. And if we look here, we can say test to do is false. And you can essentially render this like normal HTML now if you wish to.